Bjorn the Fell-Handed, also known as True Claw and the Eldest, is a venerable dreadnought of the Space Wolves chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, who holds the distinction of being one of the oldest Space Marines to still be active within the Imperium of Man. Bjorn is viewed as a figure of awe and reverenced by his fellow Space Wolves as well as other servants of the Imperium, for the Fell-Handed, prior to being interred within his dreadnought sarcophagus, had fought alongside the chapter's very Primarch, Leman Russ, during the events of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, taking part in numerous conflicts such as the burning of Prospero and the Battle of Yarant. In recognition of his skill, valor, and courage, Bjorn would eventually be inducted into the personal Wolf Guard of Russ himself, becoming the youngest ever warrior to serve within the Wolf King's retinue. Following the events of the Horus Heresy, and the subsequent introduction of the Codex Astartes, which divided the remaining Space Marine legions into smaller chapters, Russ, alongside his Wolf Guard, would choose to leave their homeworld of Fenris and depart for the warp space rift known as the Eye of Terror for some unknown purpose. However, before leaving, Russ would instruct Bjorn to remain behind upon Fenris in order to watch over the chapter in the Primarch's stead, an act that would instill feelings of rejection, bitterness, and sorrow within Bjorn, who felt that he was being punished or had otherwise failed his Gene Father in some way. For several years, at the annual Great Feast held by the chapter, the Space Wolves would continue setting a place for their Primarch in hopes that he may one day return from his quest. Realizing that their Gene Father may have become forever lost to the chapter, Bjorn, as the sole remaining member of the Wolf King's retinue, would assume leadership of the Space Wolves, becoming the first Great Wolf of the chapter. With humble reluctance, the Fell-Handed would assume the mantle of command before declaring the beginning of the first Great Hunt, where the Space Wolves would search the galaxy for their missing Primarch. In late M31, during the events of the Proxima Rebellion, Bjorn would sustain a number of injuries that were so severe that the only way to save his life was to inter him within a sarcophagus of a dreadnought. Bjorn would continue to fight fiercely upon the front lines for several centuries, but eventually the Fell-Handed would begin to spend longer and longer periods of time within his stasis-induced slumber. For the most part, the Space Wolves were content to let Bjorn sleep out of respect for the Fell-Handed's many accomplishments, with the chapter's ArhPriests only awakening him once every century in order to recount the sagas of Russ or during the most extreme and desperate of circumstances. One such example of the latter was during the Battle of the Fang, which saw the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion invade Fenris when the world was only sparsely defended, due to the majority of the Space Wolves chapter being off-world at the time. As the traitors launched their assault against the chapter's fortress monastery, known as the Fang, Bjorn would be awakened from his slumber before taking command of the remaining Space Wolves. Thanks to both the tactical genius and martial prowess of the Fell-Handed, which would even see the Dreadnought holding his own against the Demon Primarch Magnus the Red in single combat, the defenders were able to hold out long enough for the rest of the chapter to return and drive the Thousand Sons off-world. Over time, however, Bjorn had not only begun to spend longer and longer periods of time within stasis, but it would become increasingly difficult to awaken him from his slumber. The reasoning for this appears to be due to the fact that, while the Fell-Handed sleeps, his very soul is waging an unending war within the depths of warp space against the demonic legions of the Chaos Gods. As the demons attempt to besiege the hexagrammic echo of the Fang itself, the Fell-Handed, no longer confined by the limits and restraints of his physical form, rips and tears through his foes with a tireless, bestial ferocity, preventing them from achieving their objective, whatever it may truly be. This conflict has grown so intense over the centuries that Bjorn himself believes that his spirit continues to battle against the demonic threat even when his body is partially awakened from stasis. If Bjorn's claims are indeed accurate, then just how exactly is the Fell-Handed able to fight this eternal war within the depths of the warp? While it would initially seem fairly easy to simply disregard Bjorn's claims as the dreams and nightmares of a warrior that is slowly becoming senile, as many Space Marine dreadnoughts, both loyalist and traitor alike, are known to have their mental faculties degrade over time, there is a surprising amount of evidence to support the notion that Bjorn has become, in essence, the spiritual defender of Fenris. As detailed within the campaign book Curse of the Wolfen, Bjorn, after his spiritual echo defeated an exceptionally powerful demon in combat, would learn that warriors from the Grey Knights chapter were walking directly into a trap upon the moon of Valdemani, which had fallen under the influence of the chaos god Tzeentch, a trap which, according to the demon, threatened to seal the very fate of the Space Wolves chapter. Despite the danger that it posed to his mind, body and soul at the time, Bjorn would partially awaken from his slumber in order to urge the Wolf Lord, Crum Dragongaze, who had been instructed by the chapter's Great Wolf, Logan Grimnar, to remain upon Fenris as the rest of the chapter participated in the hunt for the Wolfen, to instead make all haste to Valdemani so as to prevent such a catastrophe from ever coming to pass. Because Bjorn was able to obtain the knowledge of events unfolding upon Valdemani from a demon whilst he slumbered, this would indeed appear to suggest that Bjorn's claims of him waging an eternal war within the warp are indeed accurate. According to Curse of the Wolfen, the reason as to why Bjorn's soul is able to combat against the entities of the warp while his physical form slumbers is due to him simply having an ancient and powerful spirit. While this explanation is in itself somewhat vague, this does point towards a rather interesting possibility in regards to how Bjorn managed to develop such an unusual ability. Could the Fell-Handed in fact be a latent psyker? After all, psykers are known to demonstrate a far stronger connection to the warp than those individuals who demonstrate little to no psychic ability. One piece of evidence to support the notion of Bjorn being a latent psyker is shown within the novel Battle of the Fang. As the rune priest Odin Sturmhard attempted to inspire and rouse his battle brothers into performing greater acts of heroism and bravery against traitor Legion forces, he would sense the psychic presence of Magnus the Red as the demon Primarch materialized elsewhere within the Fang. The sensation experienced by Sturmhard was so intense that he was forced to steady himself from falling. Bjorn would then note that he too felt the traitor's presence, prompting Vir Greylock, the Jarl of the 12th Great Company, to inquire as to what the two warriors had sensed. Because Bjorn and Sturmhard were the only individuals present at the time who were able to sense the presence of Magnus as he materialized within the Fang, this would appear to further support the possibility that Bjorn has, at some point in time, managed to unlock long-dormant psychic abilities, such as telepathy, or at the very least to a certain unconscious extent. Such a notion is not entirely unprecedented, as there have been a number of documented instances regarding Space Marines who have over time managed to awaken and harness their latent psychic potential. One such example is shown with the loyalist lunar wolf, Garviel Loken, whose psychic potential was not only noticed by Malkador the Sigillite prior to the Siege of Terra, but would appear to fully awaken once the siege had begun in earnest. Indeed, Loken would discover the true extent of his repressed psychic abilities after he learned that he could unlock the true killing potential of a Force Sword, a weapon that is specifically designed to be wielded by psykers. If Bjorn is indeed a latent psyker, then this would mean that the Fell-Handed demonstrates an incredibly high degree of psychic potential, for it has been heavily implied that should a psyker be interred within a sarcophagus of a dreadnought, then such individuals will have their connection to the warp severed, or at the very least will begin to lose it over an extended period of time. The only major exception in this regard is shown with those chapters derived from Blood Angel's genetic stock, for as detailed within the 9th edition Blood Angels Codex, the chapter's warriors have such an inherently strong connection to the warp that their librarians are able to retain such a link long after their interment within the dreadnought, making those chapters descended from the Blood Angels the only ones to make extensive use of specialist librarian dreadnoughts. Because of the cultural beliefs held by the Space Wolves and native Fenrisians in general, which typically hold psykers in contempt, often viewing such individuals as being no better than witches or warlocks, it's highly possible that Bjorn may not even realize that he had unlocked a number of latent psychic abilities and may instead choose to believe that his actions are simply being guided by the spirits of Fenris. As such, the Fell-Handed could be completely unaware that he is in fact generating an astral projection of himself into the warp, consciously or otherwise, as opposed to him being guided by spirits or even by the will of the Emperor. But then again, Given that the Fang itself is known to incorporate some form of hexagrammic network within its construction, so as to prevent demons and psychics from penetrating its defenses, could it be possible that Bjorn, as opposed to being a true psyker, is essentially uploading his consciousness, perhaps a portion of his very soul, into the hexagrammic network of the Fang itself whenever his sarcophagus is placed into stasis? After all, Bjorn's sarcophagus was said to be amongst the most technologically advanced of its kind when it was first forged, granting the Fell-Handed a greater degree of agility and sensory input when compared to other types of dreadnought. With this in mind, it's possible that Bjorn's sarcophagus could have also incorporated some form of apparatus which would allow him to effectively dislocate his mind from his body, a feature that may have initially been intended to allow his mind to travel through the noosphere or wireless network of the Fang so that he may retain some degree of consciousness whenever his physical form is interred within stasis. If this were indeed the case, then once again Bjorn could very well be performing such an act subconsciously or involuntarily. However, if Bjorn is able to upload his very consciousness into the very hexagrammic network or noosphere of the Fang, then one would need to wonder as to why the chapter's various rune, wolf, and iron priests, who fulfill the roles of librarians, apothecaries, and techmarines respectively, are unable to detect the instances when Bjorn's spirit leaves his body. After all, one would assume that such an act would result in a number of anomalous readings being reported by those individuals who are tasked with monitoring the vital signs of the Fell-Handed. Given how revered Bjorn has become to the Space Wolves chapter, being a living link to their very Primarch, then any abnormal readings would be reported and investigated with all due haste, for the chapter would not dare risk losing such an important figure. Or perhaps the spirits of Fenris are indeed somehow responsible in allowing Bjorn's consciousness to dislocate from his physical self as he slumbers, so that the Dreadnought can battle against the entities of the warp which threaten the very spiritual sanctity of the world. While such a notion would indeed be thematically and even culturally appropriate for Bjorn, there is also little else to support such a possibility. Whatever the truth may be behind Bjorn's newfound abilities, it would appear that the Fell-Handed will nonetheless continue to stand in the defense of Fenris, both physically and spiritually, for millennia to come. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.